Welcome. I'm Jeff Gedmin, acting president of RFERL, headquartered in Prague, and co-founder of American Purpose. And it's great to see, good heavens, so many friends. Anders Osman, Fritz, Arch Puddington, speaking of RFERL, Heart and Soul, Matilda in Norway, and too many people to cite your mention, but it's a great Ray here in Prague. Thank you all very much in advance for your valuable time. I'm here in Prague, the RFERL headquarters. You know this company, 27 languages, across all platforms, 21 bureaus. And I'm just back from Berlin. And I have to tell you, in Berlin, well, wherever I met or went, in the Bundestag, in government, with the Tagesspiegel, with Bildam Sonntag, people I knew, people I didn't know that I hadn't met before. We sat down to meet, and the first thing they asked was, how's Alsu? It was inspiring. We just had 45 minutes ago here in the building, Alexandra Matsachuk, the civil society leader and human rights lawyer from Kyiv, whose small NGO was awarded last year the Nobel Prize for Peace. And when I met her and walked her in, the first thing she said was, how's Alsu? And then yesterday, if I may complete the thought, we hosted Christoph Heusgen here, Angela Merkel's former national security advisor, former ambassador to the United Nations, chairman now of the Munich Security Conference. And he walked in to the premises. I escorted him up to the door. And I said, I want to talk to you about a case. And he reached into his winter coat and he pulled out a press clip and he said, I know, Alsu. So it's an honor and privilege that you take time with us today. Thank you in advance. What we're going to do is we're going to engage in a little bit of a conversation with Pavel, whom I introduce, Rem, whom I introduce, and comment from Julia Shosha and Greg. More about that in just a moment. Let me tell you, or maybe remind you, that case turns on the following very basic facts. A colleague of ours traveled from Prague to Russia, to Kazan on May 20th this summer. She endeavored to leave the country after a private visit, visiting her elderly and frail mother. She was detained from a flight in Kazan that would have gone through Istanbul back to Prague. We waited patiently and offered whatever support we could in the weeks that ensued. And then suddenly on October 18th, we were surprised and disappointed that Russian authorities shifted and accelerated quite brazenly, bringing her in for interrogation in handcuffs, surrounded by large men. They published her passport page. She's a U.S. citizen. She's a dual national. She's still a Russian citizen too. They denounced, the Russian authorities did, her husband, Pavel Butorin, who is the lead of current time Russian language digital and television, and made all sorts of noises about all sorts of charges that have made us deeply, deeply concerned. I'm going to start by asking Pavel a question or two. We're going to turn to Rem, her Alsu's editor. At a certain point, we're going to move to you, Greg. Greg is a former RFERL senior Central Newsroom analyst and now the executive director of the Institute of Current World Affairs. And then Julia Shosha from Georgetown, from GW, Middle East Institute, to widen the conversation, because these things, the case is important and we're fixated on the case and we're going to get Alsu out. And these things happen in a context. They don't happen in a vacuum, but we want to have a little bit of a conversation about what's happening inside the Russian Federation and U.S. policy too. But more about that later. With that somewhat lengthy introduction, thank you for your patience. Pavel, First things first, where is Alsu physically, as best one knows, and how is she doing?
Yeah, thank you. Let me begin by saying how much I appreciate all the support and offers of help that myself and my family have been receiving past few weeks. It's really a worldwide campaign for Asu's release, and I can't thank you all for your support. And I'm happy to see so many friends and colleagues in this call. Um, Alsu is currently held at a pre-trial detention facility in the state of Kazan, that is the capital of Dagestan. The the pretrial detention facility is in the city. She is not. She hasn't been convicted, so she is a suspect at this point. And the offense, and as a matter of fact, the offense that she has been unjustly charged with is not a violent crime. However, she's being held in what is really a prison. And the judge earlier in an appeals court denied the attorney's motion for house arrest. So Alsu is now kept in a prison cell. Um, we have some information about her conditions. I'm often asked how I communicate with Alsu. We are able to send her letters through an official online system. We know that these letters are being censored. Uh, so because Alsu cannot communicate with us freely, we can't be sure about her conditions exactly and whether her captors are treating her with the respect and dignity that she deserves. So yes, she is in a in a cell. We think is quite cool. Um, those pretrial detention facilities tends to be overcrowded. I know that she has access to some books. I know that she is trying to form bonds with other inmates. Uh, she misses her children and me, and children miss their mother. They want to speak to her, and that hasn't happened yet. We miss her very much, and we want also back.
Hubble, thank you. We're going to come back to you in just a moment. I want to turn to you, Rem, and knit you into the conversation here at this stage. Rem, you're from Kazan. You know the political train and the social train very well, and you lead this group inside RFRL, and you are also its editor. Could you tell us a little bit? This was a private trip visiting her mother, but prior to that, and through the period of time she's worked for us, what kind of work, what kind of reporting was she doing?
I've been myself working with RFRL more than 30 years now, and 25 years of that was with Alsu. So you can say that we are both veterans in this, and her professional growth took place before my eyes, actually. She started as a moderator of our hour-long radio program, which we broadcasted via FM affiliate in Tatarstan, and which Mr. Putin later banned, just canceled the agreement with the affiliate and make everything to close our Kazan bureau there because people listen to us and listen to also. And what is especially is interesting, if we are speaking about also today, many listeners like her pleasant and soft voice. I do remember it very well. And we made and renew it all the time, our radio breaks, especially with Alsu's voice. So she's our highly respected colleague, inspiring team member and true professional. And her work after the radio, as the radio period of our work ended, was linked mostly leading and covering our ethnic minority issues like cultural topics, with the time then Mr. Putin came to power, big attack on ethnic diversity has started in Russia, not only against Tatar or Bashkir, but any any kind of diversity, ethnic diversity, religious diversity. So we were focused heavily on cultural issues, on linguistic issues, and also was instrumental in taking lead in these new projects. And I can mention simply our new and very successful Tatar educational project called Ada Online, which is meant to teach Tatar, because in current Russia, Tatar language is under siege actually, as Russian authorities, federal authorities, uh, decided to get rid of minority languages, just limit their existence within the families, which makes them, which leads actually to the destruction of these languages, in fact. So we started with this project and also was leading this project, and very successfully. Besides that, I can also say that she liked to cover gender issues. We also had a new project called Not Only Women's Issue. It was about the domestic violence, which is still an actual and top issue in the target region. And many other, I can list them quite long, but in all this, this work was done by also very professionally, which is really what I value the most. If she starts something, she did everything like to its perfection.
Ren, thank you. As I heard you speaking, and the quality and the integrity and the kind of work that Alsu has done for us. Pardon me, I was reminded of a conversation I had recently with Belarusian colleagues of ours. But you all have people in prison in Belarus, have someone in prison in Russian-occupied Crimea. We have now also unlawfully detained in Kazan. And one of the young Belarusian colleagues said to me about Belarus, we're like Al-Qaeda now. We're extremists. If we do work in the realm of accurate, fair-minded, responsible reporting, space of civil society, sympathy for human rights and rule of law, we're like Al-Qaeda now. It's really quite bewildering and stunning how rapidly some of these countries and markets are changing. Let me come back to you, Pavel, for a moment. Two questions. One about Alsu, because you started there, and her conditions. And it's painful, but I just want to take another step on that path. She's not been convicted of anything. She's not a convict. She's in a pre-trial detention facility. And as you say, these cells tend to be overcrowded. Today, if you wanted to know, at this moment in Kazan, the temperature is 4 degrees Celsius. That's barely 40 degrees Fahrenheit. It gets colder at night. Tell us what we know about not just such a facility, but how people are held. We're working closely with the Wall Street Journal because Evan has been in pre-trial detention since March. We're fighting for her to get access to consular affairs also. Is this par for the course? Does this strike you as unusual, exceptional? Because to my estimation, this has cruelty to it.
We know that typically those pretrial detention facilities in Moscow, in other regions of Russia, are overcrowded. Sometimes those cells are for 4 people, but they house 6 people sometimes. We know from other cases that especially Americans are not granted consular access. Also is an American citizen, and as an American citizen, she has a right to consular access. As far as I know, more than 3 weeks, it will be soon 4 weeks of her detention. The Russian authorities have not yet formally notified the United States of her detention and haven't granted her consular access. So obviously her rights are being violated. One little piece of information I know about her particular pretrial detention facility is that for Kazan, that is the capital of Tatarstan, a predominantly Muslim region in Russia, the library, and I mentioned that also, as far as I understand, has some access to books. The library mostly offers books on Orthodox Christianity. And by the way, that pretrial detention facility, you can look it up on Google Maps. This is not secret information. You can look it up. It's CISO 2 in the Kazan Tatarstan. So you can actually see the exterior of that building. And I don't think you
I
can.
was sorry to interrupt you because we looked at it in your office yesterday.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, it's 2 buildings, correct? I think that's worth noting.
Yes, and one of them is an old church that is part of it's sort of dilapidated, but it's part of the compound. Yes.
Yeah, and it is a compound with barbed wire and surveillance cameras offset. Pavel, would you say a word, and then we're going to widen the conversation, widen the lens by inviting Greg and Yulia to join. Would you say a word about our strategy, our multifaceted strategy to improve her conditions and win her release?
Well, I'm going to speak for myself. I'm working day and night, helping our campaign to raise as much awareness of Alsu's case as possible. We're trying really hard to reach out to as many organizations and government entities in the United States, but also in our allied countries, to raise that awareness. I think the more people are aware of Alsu's situation, the better it is. One of the tracks we're following is working with the State Department. I believe that Alsu was detained wrongfully. I do think that I hope that the United States can use every avenue available to it to secure her a speedy release, including her designation as a wrongfully detained person. Why do I think that Alsu is a political prisoner? I keep saying that, and I'm adamant about it. Alsu is held there for political reasons. As a matter of fact, political activity is in the very definition of the Russian notion of foreign agent, which of course we deny, and she's not an agent of any government. However, the Russian authorities link her journalism to political activities, so they can't even deny with a straight face that she is held there for political reasons. We cannot rely on the Russian court system for any justice because the Russian court system is hardly independent. Also, I think it's definitely clear to me that the reason she's targeted is because she is an American citizen and she works for Radio Free Europe. Because how many more people living in Russia could they have accused of not self-reporting as foreign agents? Clearly, authorities are intent on keeping Alsu locked up. They deliberately waited for an American citizen to find themselves in a vulnerable situation, and they waited for this first case to come to a close before arresting her on these new charges.
Pavel, thank you. Let us, as I suggested, widen the lens a little bit. I'm going to invite you, Craig, first to comment. Again, Craig's my friend and colleague, executive director of the Institute of Current World Affairs, co-sponsor day. And I would say, very important part of the RFERL network. You to just hear and or remember it so fondly, Greg. Greg, there's a context for these things. As I said, they don't happen in a vacuum. And so give us some sense in your view of developments inside Russia. I'll give you my view, and you're an expert, and you will correct. I think that Russia is getting harder. I think that there have been measurable changes since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. It seems to me that we have, now I venture, both now a Putin problem, but probably a wider Russia problem. And I see things tightening and tightening and tightening. That has great uh, uh, challenge for our work, but also for the United States and for the Europeans. If I'm right, things get harder before they get easier. Give us a few views on this.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Thanks for your kind words. And thanks very much for having me here. I'm honored to be a part of this. And I think you're absolutely right. Look, the press in Russia has been under pressure by the Putin regime from his very first day in office in the year 2000. Russian journalists have been killed and repressed right from the beginning. I remember very well when I was working in the Radio Liberty Bureau for Radio Free Europe in the early 2000s, the investigative journalist Yuri Shikachikin was almost certainly poisoned and died. Of course, later there was Anna Politkovskaya, the famous reporter on Chechnya and other issues. And many, many others. There have been many repressed and killed in the regions, Russia's far-flung regions that we've never even heard of. There was a difference for Western journalists and journalists who were working for Western foreign outlets. They were sort of harassed and criticized, but largely left to report relatively freely. I mean, there was sort of increasing restrictions under the quarter century of Putin's rule. But when I was a reporter for NPR in Moscow in the mid 2000s, I could travel really almost wherever I wanted. There have been more and more closed military regions and cities, but nevertheless, until around the year 2000, when there were parliamentary elections, and these were really the first really seriously fixed elections, and a number of reporters trying to come to Russia, election observers and such, were barred entry. I was almost kicked out then. I was coming back from Washington to Moscow and told that I had to leave on the next plane out of there, and was actually allowed to stay only because of the intervention of our terrific ambassador at the time, Bill Burns. But this has very much changed since the launch of the war in February 2022. A number of Western reporters, increasing number of Western reporters have been kicked out, denied entry. The BBC reporter, Sarah Rainsford, among others. And then, of course, in March of this year, Evan Gershkovich was arrested. And now we have Alsu also arrested. Now, we didn't even see this kind of thing take place under the Soviet Union. This is new for us, and it's a tremendous challenge to our administration to deal with it.
Greg, thank you. And we will come back to you. Yulia, I'd like to go to you right now. Yulia, as I mentioned, who teaches European security at Georgetown and George Washington Universities in Washington. And pardon me, Yulia, who leads a program at the Middle East Institute in Washington on Black Sea security. And Yulia, who hails from Bucharest. I'm going to ask you a first question, Yulia, that you're not expecting. And so indulge me. It's not high-end analysis yet, but all politics is local, as they say. So let's get a sense for where you come from. And that is the following. Romania, of course, during the Cold War was so severe in its dictatorship, as we all know, under the brutal dictator Ceausescu, but also had a slightly different attitude toward the Soviet Union, much of the rest of the Warsaw Pact. And we can talk about this through analysis and President Nixon and his relations with Bucharest, but one could talk about it in more personal ways too. Here goes my surprise to you. When you were growing up, did you have a dog?
Yes, I did.
You did, and you had a dog with a friend, and you laughed. And dogs have to have names. And when you had your dog and you thought about naming your dog, what was that conversation like with your friend, and how did that end up?
Yeah, you're taking advantage of a story that I told a few times, and now my students at Georgetown come to me and say, "I asked someone about you. Tell me the story of your dog." So it's not it's not very Radio Free Europe related, but I think we'll get to that in a second. And I just want to say also thank you for including me in this. I'm a humble listener, so were my parents, and also kind of products of the voice of freedom that brought it to the region. And so with that in mind, with my parents learning about the revolution in Romania and that very harsh dictatorship from listening illegally to Radio Free Europe in silence, they had to not listen to it too loud in case neighbors would walk down the street and would hear it. They've participated in it, and then in the 1990s, as I was growing up, and my best friend, who's like my brother, was growing up, we got a dog and we wanted to give the dog the best name possible. And we didn't know much then. We probably didn't know at 5 or 6 or 7 years old what the capital of the United States was. We probably thought it was New York. But we knew from our parents that the best thing that could happen to us and to where we're from is for the United States to come. And so we named our dog NATO.
So, Yulia, give us a little bit of a regional perspective, if you could. One tends to view things understandably in isolation. And so Evan and, of course, Alsu and Paul Whelan, these very, very important people in hostage cases. The war in Ukraine, just vital at stake is the fate and future of a sovereign democratic nation. But can you connect dots for us a little bit and give us maybe a bit of a bigger picture? It's said now, it's become conventional wisdom that the war in the Middle East is good for Vladimir Putin. Is that true? If so, why?
Yeah, I think that's a big question. It's certainly both the war in the Middle East and the full-scale invasion and Alsu's illegal detention is certainly part of a very dark hour in European security that I think a lot of us point to the fault in that, of course, in the Kremlin. There's going to be a lot of speculation, and I think there already is, about whether we will find some kind of a clear connection, some weapons in Gaza that belong to Hamas and have the Russian flag on. And I think that's pretty unlikely to happen, and I think that's not the point. But the point is that indeed, over the last month or so, since the outbreak of hostilities in the Middle East, we have talked in Western media a lot more about the interconnections between Russia and Iran, between Russia and potentially China, but for sure between Russia and Iran in terms of dominating this space. And if we're looking at Russian sort of military or strategic ambitions, it's what they call the Arc of Steel, that we would call the eastern flank of NATO, and then it goes further south. But for Russia, the Arc of Steel starts in the Arctic and ends in the Gulf. And so that would certainly be of interest in that it has succeeded for the many journalists here that's preaching something that is already obvious. It has succeeded in pushing Ukraine off for the first time in 1.5 years, off the headlines, off the front page. And there are now Washington Post papers or New York Times or you name it that do not feature any more articles about Ukraine on a given day, and that's the first time. And so I think that is the most important connection that Vladimir Putin could maybe take advantage of. That we haven't the bet has always been, or our estimate has been, that time is on his side, or that that's what he's thinking in his strategy. And of course, media, and of course, the messaging on the war and disinformation and propaganda are a clear part of Russia's very powerful. Maybe they aren't as powerful conventionally as we thought they were, but when it comes to propaganda warfare and also determining us to focus less on Ukraine and on Central and Eastern Europe and on Russian aggression in and outside of the battlefield, they have been quite successful, I would say.
So, Yulia, thank you. I'm going to circle back to Rem for one moment, and then we're going to open up the questions. You all, we're going to do a hard stop in 25 minutes. So that is 11 a.m. East Coast, 5 p.m. Prague, and we'll get as many in as we can. Rem, my question to you is, we started, but we didn't complete this part of the conversation. To authorities, and this could apply to Iran too, or the Taliban in Afghanistan, all different, but maybe cut from similar cloth. What is it about culture reporting? Much of the kind of work you and colleagues do, and certainly what I also undertook. Kazan, I've not been, unfortunately, yet, but it's a cultural capital with universities and music schools and this work in language and indeed in minority rights. Why is that a subject of such sensitivity for rulers like Vladimir Putin's regime?
You know, Jeff, Tatar Bashkir service works with the region where Russia's other than Russian, but still large ethnic communities, as Tatar, Bashkir, Chuvash, and also a few other Finno people live. And they are not new to these lands. All of them are indigenous, where each of them has developed own and distinct culture and traditions. And Tatar Bashkir service is one of the oldest at RFRL. By the way, we will mark our 70th anniversary. So it's about the background for our work in this region. And you also know, and many of listeners probably know, that Tatars are the second biggest ethnic community in Russia behind Russians. And they, along with Bashkirs, pretty much differ from Russian majority. Different language, which belongs to the Turkic family, different historical background and heritage, and different religion too. Tatars and Bashkirs are predominantly Sunni Muslims with deep Islamic roots in history. So it was quite okay previously as Russian Federation started developing after the perestroika. But at some point, especially after Russia decided somehow, with new leader, with Putin, decided somehow to change the concept of the future for the state, for the Russian Federation, this diversity was somehow taken as a threat to the state. So the main problem, they see the diversity of the Russian society. I mean, is Russian as a civic society, not ethnic unity. And that's why they started looking for extremists, separatists, or religious extremist radicals, accusing them of doing everything against the Russian state, against the unity, about dividing the Russian Federation and breaking up Russian Federation. So currently, yes, culture is developing in Russia, especially in capitals like Moscow and Petersburg, flourishing. But it's one language culture, where other minority languages kind of isolated from the main cultural movements, cultural tendencies. And in this environment, hostile environment towards ethnic languages, it's really hard to make a reporting, cultural reporting on this, because all the time we have to cover these issues just simply because government or pro-government media tries to avoid it. It's taboo issues. And one of the part of our mission actually to raise that kind of taboo underreported issues. And we do this. We serve also underserved communities like Tatar language teachers or Tatar cultural figures who are, again, they don't have the same equality, the same space for their work, for their creative work as Russian language cultural activities are going on. And I do understand that Russian regime sees that as one of the threats. And it's exactly why they declared Tatar Bashkir service of the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty as a foreign agent among the first 5 of this kind of media in Russian Federation. It wasn't BBC, it wasn't VOA. Sorry, VOA was among them, yeah. I mean, exactly those who are engaged in this kind of focusing or addressing ethnic minorities in Russian Federation.
So, Ren, thank you very much. So, you all, 20 minutes ago, 90 some colleagues in the room. Thanks very much for your valuable time. If you use the button, the raise hand function, I'll call on you. And when I don't see you, which invariably is the case in these things, Laura will bring to my attention who's waiting. Laura, do we have somebody first off ready to?
Yes, Allison is ready.
Allison, please go ahead. And in each case, if you would identify yourself and be brief.
Hello, I'm Allison Shealy. I've written some for the American Purpose. First of all, Mr. Butor, and I hope that your wife is returned to you soon and safe and whole. I wanted to comment on not only is it reporting on minority issues that makes one a target, looking at the list of Americans who have been wrongfully detained, a disproportionate number are ethnic minorities. Brittany Griner, a Black woman married to a woman. Mr. Gershkovich is from a Jewish background. Alsu is from Tatarstan. So this goes all the way back to the Russian Empire, where there were harsher penalties and worse exiles for the ethnic rebels. It's very much Putin is repositioning himself as Tsar.
Allison, thank you. Pavel, do you want to, we can leave it or you can respond, but Allison, thank you. Pavel?
I don't have much to add. Also, I guess I will add also identifies as a Muslim as well. So yeah, but thank you for saying that.
Pavel, thank you. Mark, I see your hand is up. You are next.
Mark Trevelyan speaking from Reuters. Can you hear me okay?
Mark, yes, we do. Please.
Yeah, thank you for organizing this. And I'm very sorry, Pavel, for what has happened to your wife and Jeff, to your colleague. You mentioned in your invitation and in your introduction that you're concerned about the possibility of further charges being brought against Alsu. Can you please say, what leads you to believe that is a risk for her, and what do you understand might be the nature of such charges?
Pavel, would you like to respond to that?
I'd rather not speculate on that and not give the authorities any more ideas about how to prosecute my wife. Anything can happen. with the Russian system, focusing on the campaign for her speedy release. I may want to add, though, that as Alsu's husband, as an American citizen, I have very little information about the content of her case. We know the article under which she has been charged, but formally speaking, no one is sending us information, about the actual content of that investigation. So we have limited visibility into what they have against her. So I think it would be wise on my part anyway to just talk about the charges that we're aware of and not speculate about any cases that can be charged.
Thank you. Can we go to you next, please? You are muted, or at least I, for one, cannot hear you. It might be a volume issue.
He appears to be unmuted, but I don't hear anything either. Are you connected to audio? Can you hear us? Maybe we go to
Here's
Carolyn.
my suggestion. So Amin sorts that, and he'll fix it, or he'll put his question or comment in chat. Let's go on with the next. We will come back to you. Laura, who else do we have right now?
Our own Carolyn has her hand raised.
Our own Carolyn. Carolyn, who is the acting editor-in-chief of American Purpose. Carolyn, please.
Just trying to fill some awfully large shoes at the moment. So my question is, just as Brittany Griner was swapped with Victor Bout, I was just curious if one of you might speak a little bit to what are Russia's potential political motivations with holding Alsu captive?
I'm going to answer a different question, and then I'm going to let Pavel and Rim answer your question. I'm going to say, Carolyn, that because you mentioned the word swap, that we're working on multiple tracks with multiple contexts and partners, some of whom are on this call today. Valuable. We're learning so much from the dear colleagues at the Wall Street Journal who are working for Evans' release and others. We're working with the United States government. We're working with NGOs, working with European allies who have some channels to this Kremlin. And it may be that in due course, that is a way to win her release. It's early days for that. And that's not what we do, but it's what we encourage, because we encourage the fastest path possible to her release and return to her husband and kids. That's that piece. Pavel, do you want to respond to, if you wish, we don't want to do anything that endangers the case, but speculate on why this, why now, why this with Alsu, the motivations of that side, so that we better understand what they want and what we can do to attain her release?
I appreciate your question. I'd rather, again, not speculate. As Alsu's husband, I don't really have much information about any possible swap. It's not something that they can publicly discuss with us, certainly not with members of the family. I have, the risk of repeating myself, I will say that I think that she's targeted specifically because she's an American citizen. Also was not and is not on the list of foreign agents. She works for an organization that is listed as a foreign agent by the Russian Justice Ministry. However, herself, in her private capacity, unlike many of our colleagues at RFRL, also is not a designated foreign agent. So it just strikes me as it's certainly not a coincidence that she is the first such case. She's the first such case. She's the first individual who's been arrested on these charges of not self-reporting as a foreign agent. So being an American citizen, being a journalist for Radio Free Europe, and someone who find themselves in this precarious position where they had to travel to Russia think all these factors lead us to believe that it's a targeted campaign against her and against this news organization.
Pavel, I'm going to ask you two questions. One, how long has Alsu been an American?
She became an American citizen in February. It will be 10 years this February. So in February 2014, she became a citizen.
Okay.
After
Let's-
going through the process of, being a green card holder, it's a rigorous, for a legal immigrants, it's a rigorous process to become a U.S. citizen.
Yeah. Thank you. My second question, Pavel, is so this large building, this headquarters here in Prague with some 700 colleagues on the ground floor in the atrium, this wide open space, is current time what you lead, the Russian language television and digital network. And you have dozens of colleagues down there from Russia, but not only Russia, from Ukraine, other countries, seasoned journalists and editors and producers, but some in their 20s and 30s. And I want to ask you a question about the colleagues and the atmosphere. I walked through a day or so ago and stopped at one of the desks, and I said, I just said, "How are you?" And this colleague said, "It's personal now." How are people taking this detention of Alsu? It applies to RIMS Group, the broader Russian service, and current time. How are people taking this?
Well, they are taking it personally. Everybody actually knew all this time that also has been stuck in Russia since late May, and I've been overwhelmed with offers of support and help. I'm very appreciative of all that. We, as you said, Jeff, many of our colleagues are nationals. They too sometimes have ailing parents. That's something they have on their minds. They want to be able to travel. After all, people believe in freedom of movement. They want to be able to move around and go visit their family. And so this is, of course, a very unsettling situation for so many of my colleagues. Ukrainians can't travel to Ukraine for security reasons. Russians can't travel to Russia at the risk of being held hostage by the Russian regime. Now Russians are even unsure whether they can travel to countries like Kyrgyzstan or Georgia. We just reported the disappearance and abduction of Russian activists, and then they travel to Russia in pretrial detention facilities. So it is definitely a very troubling situation, personally, for many of my colleagues here. And again, I appreciate their support in this trying.
Pavel, thank you. Greg, I'm going to go to you with Amin's question. I'm going to read it. If I don't do justice, it's in chat. Someone will correct me. This paradox or this dilemma, first of all, we didn't publicize, probably the solution to this, after she was first detained or prevented from leaving the country in third week May, we did not publicize her case. We engaged in quiet diplomacy and hoping for the very, very best, and thought that there was some chance they would just release her, and they didn't. And on the contrary, they accelerated and now arrested and detained her. Greg, how do you think about this problem and dilemma, as Amin has raised it in chat? We believe now we are doing this. We're on the road, publicizing her case. We're advised by a number of people, including the White House, the State Department. Tell her story. Tell your story. And yet, are we not communicating to such regimes in such cases? You have a hostage. They're of great value. You've made a useful selection from your point of view. Greg?
Thanks, Jeff. I won't be the first to say that the only person inside Putin's head is Putin. So it's a bit of a mug's game to predict what will be effective, in terms of communicating to him, negotiating with him, potentially over a swap. But I can say this, that the state of repression in Russia, the state of Russian society, has been a steady progression from the very beginning of Putin's taking power. The logic of his regime has been to engage in a steady ratcheting up of political repression at home and confrontation with the West and much of the international community abroad. And really, even before the launch of Putin's war against Ukraine, he's positioned himself as a Stalin figure, essentially, as the great savior of Russia, and of course Stalin, who has been increasingly lionized as somebody who, was a little bit rough, but modernized the country and industrialized the country. I should say the empire, the Soviet Union. And now we live in, or not we, sorry, the Russians live in a society in which children are turning in their teachers for criticizing the war in Ukraine, where Wagner mercenaries, who were convicted rapists and murderers sent to fight in Ukraine, then pardoned, are coming back into society and living among ordinary Russians and committing crimes again. And I think this has a very deliberate reason, that it's really, to a certain degree, it's difficult to compare Russian society now with Soviet society. People can still travel. You can still drive fancy Western cars. But on the level of relationships in society, fewer and fewer people can trust each other. And so I think it's the arrests of Western reporters are just kind of again a ratcheting up of this kind of thing. And along with that, we all know about Russian propaganda and what the role it played in our election in 2016 and in many other cases. I'll just say this, that the Russian delegation to the UN Human Rights Council just presented a report saying that Russia carefully follows the UN Charter, that the rights of citizens are protected, and that the designation of foreign agent doesn't in any way affect the rights of anybody inside the country. It's merely meant to inform the Russian public of foreign influence. This actually from a Radio Liberty report. So it's and I think this is going to get worse. And I think in this situation that the only thing that we can do is be forthright. And I agree with you, Jeff, that Alsu's story needs to be told, and that we have to be forthright about our values and interests, and continue to press them as strongly, as widely as possible.
So, Greg, thank you. You all, we are so scarce on time. That's my fault as your moderator. So here we go. So unfair. Caitlin and Fritz, can you do 60 seconds each? And together, do you mind? Caitlin, you first.
Sure. I'm with Freedom of the Press Foundation. You mentioned that you've been speaking to the State Department about having Alsu designated as wrongfully detained. I was wondering if the State Department is, why they haven't done that yet? Are they reluctant to do so, or is this something that just takes time?
So thank you. I will answer that. We're engaging, they're listening, we're urging, and there are criteria to be met. And we think that she meets almost all of them, if not all of them. And so, as we say in the business of American politics, write your Congress people and help us make the case. Caitlin, thank you. Fritz, can you do 60 seconds or less?
Sure. No, it's going to be complicated, so the burden's on you. I'm sort of curious, the impact for Radio Free Europe, Deutsche Welle, France 24, and so on. Well, both public and private reporting now in Russia. How many are pulling back on sending reporters. In fact, maybe, I know there are a lot of great journalists in here today, maybe somebody actually can post a number of what's happened to the number of journalists in Russia. Has there been a big drop off thanks to these kinds of arrests?
So Fritz, thank you. I'm going to weigh in again and tell you that we have strict policies recommending refraining from travel to Russia, Belarus, and Iran, Afghanistan. And I'm going to tell you that, dear Fritz, lieber Fritz, will be the subject of our next roundtable. What I'm going to say to wrap this up is, Greg, thank you very much. Greg is chairing a series on Russian exiles. And if Laura or Carolyn or Sid are able to put something, or Greg, something about that in chat, I'd be grateful. I'm grateful for all your attention to two American journalists in captivity, editor of the Wall Street Journal, and also I want to thank Pavel and Rem for the work you're doing, but the fight you're fighting. And Yulia, I have one last question for you, and it's ticking. And in 45 seconds, here we go. 1 to 10, 10 meaning extremely alarmed, and 1, we can live with this. If you think about the war in the Middle East, the American elections coming up, and what some call stalemate in Ukraine, your level of concern about regional security as you look at 2024.
So just very briefly taking advantage of my 45 seconds to second was what Greg was saying earlier about the parallels in history, how we have seen these totalitarian movements with prison and with forceful labor and with targeting of cultural activists, if you'd like, before, but it is certainly at least as dark as it used to be in the worst of times, and little hope on the horizon. I would say now with the Middle East, we moved from a 6 to an 8. If we have a third conflict, I think what we're all most afraid of, including here in Washington, D.C., then we're moving to 10 and beyond.
Okay, that focuses the mind. Thank you all for your valuable time. We will do more. Stay tuned. We'll be back. And Pavel, our love to also.
Thank you all. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. Good evening. Bye now.
Thank you.